Levi Esch stood at the edge of the sale ring with his hat in both hands and watched the auctioneer point at the Miller orchard the way a man points at something already dead. 38 acres, 320 apple trees, most of them older than the county road that ran past them. Levi was 39 years old that October, wearing his father's wool coat with the collar gone thin at the seam, and he had walked those rows twice before the sale, once at dusk and once before light, counting trunks the way another man might count coins. The bidding did not take long. Frank Miller had lost 5 harvests running to frost, and everybody in 3 townships knew it. A man from the co-op tried the land for the flat ground and quit when the price crept past what flat ground alone was worth. Roy Hutchins, who ran 400 acres of commercial apples on the ridge above town and had farmed that road for 40 years, did not bid at all. He stood near the gate with his thumbs in his belt and watched the way a man watches a horse he has already decided is lame. $1,100, the auctioneer said, and looked around once for a reason not to sell it, and found none, and sold it. Levi signed the paper. Roy Hutchins came over while the ink was still wet and looked at the orchard the way he might look at a field on fire. "You know why nobody else wanted it," Roy said. "I expect I'll learn," Levi said. "Frost took it 5 years running. Not once, 5 times. You can't out-stubborn a thermometer, son." "No," Levi said. "I don't expect I can." He did not say anything else. He folded the paper into his coat pocket and went to see about a wagon to haul his tools, and Roy Hutchins stood by the gate a while longer, in the particular stillness of a man who has already decided how a story ends and wants it on the record that he predicted it early. Word moved through the township before Levi had the trees pruned. At Pruitt's Feed and Grain, where a man named Wendell Pruitt kept the register and the gossip both, the story got told before the coffee cooled. An Amish man had bought the Miller place, paid $1,100 for 320 trees that had not turned a full profit since 2011. Some of the men allowed it was charity work. Others said it plainer. "He'll know different by bloom," Roy Hutchins said, standing at the counter with his boots still orchard muddy. "May will tell him what October couldn't." Nobody argued with that. It went around the store, then across the road to the diner, then out along the mail route, gaining a little conviction each time it was repeated, the way a stone gains smoothness from water it never asked to sit in. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Now, let's begin. Levi Esch had not always farmed orchard ground. His own place, 4 miles east along Spring Hollow Road, was 60 acres of corn and hay, and a small dairy herd, land his father had cleared with a team of Belgians before Levi was old enough to hold the lines himself. His father, Reuben Esch, had died 11 years earlier of a fever that came on fast and left just as fast, taking him with it, and Levi had buried him in the plain ground behind the meeting house and gone back to chores within 3 days, because there was no other direction to go. His wife Miriam had died the winter Levi turned 34, of a sickness the doctors in town gave a long name to and could not otherwise explain. He did not speak of it. He raised their son Daniel mostly by example and kept a small ledger book with a black cover where he wrote down weather and yields and the ordinary arithmetic of a farm, the way his father had before him. Grief, in Levi's hands, became habit. He walked the fence line before light most mornings, whether there was reason to or not, and he trusted what he could count more than what he could feel. He had wanted the Miller orchard for 2 years before it came up for sale. Not because he loved apples especially, though he did, but because his own ground was mostly spoken for, and Daniel was 13 and would want land of his own inside a decade, and an orchard, unlike a cornfield, could hold a family through 100 winters if it was handled right. The trouble was the frost. Everyone in the valley knew the trouble was the frost. Reuben Esch had known it too. Long before Levi was born, his father had farmed 6 acres of apples on the low ground behind the spring house on the home place. ground that sat lower than the rest of the valley, and caught the cold air the way a bowl catches rain. Most years those low trees blossomed and froze within the same week. Reuben had kept careful notes on it in a journal Levi had not opened in years, a green cloth-bound book that lived on a shelf in the spring house with the cheese presses and the extra harness. Levi found it again in November, looking for a tool he did not end up needing. He sat on an overturned bucket and read by lantern light for the better part of an hour, and near the back, dated the spring his own father was 26 years old, he found the entry that mattered. Flooded the low rose the night of the 12th. Water holds what air will not. Ground stayed at 34 while the ridge went to 26. Lost nothing. Worth doing again when a man has the patience and the water to spare. Levi read it twice. Then he read it a third time, out loud, to no one, because Daniel had gone to bed and the barn cat was the only other creature in the spring house to hear it. Worth doing again, he said, and closed the book. His father had tried the method exactly once, so far as the journal showed, and never repeated it. Levi did not know why. He suspected, without writing it down, that his father had run out of years before he ran out of reasons. That was a thing about the dead. They left a single sentence and no explanation, and a man was left to decide for himself whether the sentence was a promise or only a wish. The Miller orchard sat on ground lower than any of it, a long slope running down to a spring-fed pond at the southern corner that Frank Miller had never once used for anything but watering cattle that were no longer there. Levi walked the pond's edge in December with his boots breaking through skim ice and did the arithmetic in his head. Water, enough. Ground low enough. A father's sentence 40 years old, waiting to be tested against a springtime that had not yet arrived. At the feed store, the consensus hardened into a shape with a date attached to it. He'll know it was foolish by May, Roy Hutchins said again, to a smaller and more patient audience this time, because repetition was cheap and the story was good. Bloom's the only test that counts on that ground. Ask Frank Miller. Ask anybody who's farmed that hollow. The frost doesn't negotiate. Levi did not go to the feed store much that winter. He was busy pruning 320 trees that had not been touched with a saw in 6 years, cutting dead wood by lantern light before chores and after them, filling the bed of his wagon, and burning the brush in piles that lit the low-ground orange against the snow. Daniel came most evenings after his own chores were done, and the two of them worked mostly without talking, which suited them both. The failures came first, the way failures do. 41 trees turned out to be past saving, split at the crotch or hollowed by rot, and Levi cut them to stumps and did not mourn them out loud. A section of the old irrigation ditch along the eastern rows had collapsed in on itself years before and needed to be dug new, by hand, through frozen ground that fought him for every foot. He lost 2 weeks in January to a cough that kept him in bed longer than he liked, and the notebook entry from that stretch was short. Week 3. Little done. Ground still frozen. Nothing lost that wasn't already lost. Roy Hutchins came by once in February, driving slow past the lane in his truck and stopping when he saw Levi at the pond, running a hand auger through the ice to test the depth. Roy got out and stood at the fence with his collar up. "Heard you're planning to flood it," Roy said, "when the frost comes." "That's the plan," Levi said. "Water freezes too, you know." "I know it." Roy was quiet for a moment, working something over. "You'll want more water than that pond's got," he said. "Come May." "We'll see," Levi said, and went back to the auger, and Roy stood a while longer before he got back in the truck, the way a man stands at a fence when he has said his piece and is waiting, without much hope, for an argument that never comes. By March, the low rose had color in the bark again, and Levi started keeping a tighter notebook, dating every entry the way his father had. Bud swell, March 9. Bud swell, Eastern Block, March 14. He walked the trees at dawn with his hand cupped under branches, feeling for the small hard knots that would become blossoms if the weather allowed it. And some mornings he found none, and some mornings he found more than the morning before, and he wrote both kinds down without comment. Daniel started walking the rows with him most mornings that spring, not because Levi asked him to, but because there was little else worth getting up early for on a Tuesday in March. And a boy will follow a habit before he understands the reason for it. He carried the lantern. He did not say much either. Once, in April, he found a cluster of blossoms further along than the rest, and called his father over without a word, just pointed, and Levi looked at it a long moment and wrote it down. First full bloom, block 3, April 18. Ahead of the ridge by 4 days. The ditches were dug clean by then, running from the pond down through both low blocks and channels Levi had shaped with a hand level and a great deal of patience, checking the fall of the ground the way his father must have checked it 40 years before, with a level no better than his own. He tested the system twice in April, on nights that were only cold, not killing, opening the gate at the pond's edge and watching the water spread thin and dark across the ground between the rows, and in the morning the ground read 33 degrees, where the open field read 28, and Levi wrote the numbers down and underlined them once. Water holds what air will not, he wrote beneath the numbers, copying his father's line into his own book without deciding to, the way a man repeats a hymn he did not know he had memorized. He told no one what the test had shown. There was no one at the feed store who would have believed a notebook over their own memory of the Miller place, and Levi had never been a man who explained himself before he was asked. And mostly not even then. The last week of April brought a stretch of warm days that pushed every orchard in the valley into full bloom at once, the ridge and the hollow together. Apple country turned white and pink from the county road all the way to the river, a sight that drew slow-driving trucks on Sunday afternoons, and one photograph in the county paper, with Roy Hutchins standing in front of his own 400 acres, smiling like a man who had already won something. The forecast came 2 days later. A cold front out of Canada, stalling over 3 states, expected to drop temperatures into the mid-20s for 2 nights running, right at the peak of bloom, right when a single frost could undo a season for every orchard in the valley at once. At Pruitt's, the mood turned from confident to careful inside an afternoon. Wendell Pruitt sold out of propane heaters and smudge oil by 4 o'clock. Roy Hutchins ran his wind machines all that evening, testing them, the diesel motors groaning up on the ridge where anyone in the hollow could hear them working. Men who had laughed about the Amish man and his springhouse ledger in February stopped laughing long enough to worry about their own trees, and for 2 days nobody at the feed store mentioned the Miller place at all. Levi spent that Tuesday afternoon walking his rows with the notebook in his coat pocket, checking the gate valve at the pond, checking the ditch lines for blockage, checking the level of the water with the auger one more time, though he had checked it a dozen times already. Daniel helped him clear a fallen branch from the western channel without being told to. Neither of them said much. There was not much that needed saying. The temperature that night fell faster than the forecast had promised. By 9 o'clock it stood at 34. By 11 it stood at 30. Levi opened the gate at the pond at 11:15 and stood in the dark listening to the water find the channels his father's sentence had described to him, spreading thin and black across the ground under 320 trees in full bloom, catching what starlight there was and throwing it back up at the branches. Up on the ridge, the wind machines roared through the night, stirring warmer air down into the orchard rows, buying Roy Hutchins a few degrees he badly needed. Along the county road, propane heaters glowed orange in rows like a string of dying stars, burning fuel that men could not afford not to burn. In town, 3 families with backyard trees wrapped their young stock in bedsheets and old quilts and hoped. Levi did not sleep. He walked the rows every 40 minutes with the thermometer and the lantern, checking the ground temperature the way his father had described checking it, and at 12:40 he wrote 33 degrees. Block 1. At 1:50 he wrote 32 degrees, holding, at 3:10, with the cold at its worst and the whole county silent, except for the ridge machines. He crouched at the edge of Block 2 and touched a blossom cluster with 2 fingers and found it whole, unblackened, cold but alive. Water standing in a thin sheet 6 inches from the roots and giving up its warmth exactly as a man 40 years dead had said it would. 310, 32.5. Held, he wrote it and did not say anything else, because there was no one there to say it to, and some things a man keeps for the book instead of a listener. The frost broke at dawn, the way frosts do, all at once and then entirely gone, the sun coming up pale over a valley that had spent the night fighting a war on 3 different fronts. Levi walked his rows in the gray light with Daniel beside him, and block by block the blossoms held, pink and white and whole, water standing in puddles between the trees that would be dry again by noon. Up on the ridge, Roy Hutchins walked his own rows and found a different story. The wind machines had done what wind machines could do, which was not quite enough on the exposed high ground, and nearly a third of his bloom had blackened overnight, curling at the edges the way frost-killed blossom always curls, a color no grower in that valley needed explained to him. The word reached Pruitt's feed and grain before the coffee was cold, the way word always did. It was carried first by a hired man of Roy's, who mentioned it to another customer while paying for fence wire, not thinking much of it. By noon it had traveled to the diner. By evening it had reached the co-op, gaining a little more shape each time it passed hands, the way water finds its own channel without anyone digging at one. His rows never blackened, the hired man had said, and somebody at the diner repeated it nearly word for word, and somebody at the co-op repeated it again until the sentence had worn smooth from handling and needed no further explanation to anyone who heard it. At Pruitt's, the talk turned careful in a way it had not been careful all winter. Wendell Pruitt, who had heard every version of the story pass his counter since October, allowed that he had never in 30 years of running that store heard of a man flooding an orchard against frost, and allowed further that he had never in 30 years heard of it working, either, which was a different kind of statement than the ones the store had been making about Levi Esch all winter. Roy Hutchins did not come to the store that week at all. Men noticed that too. A man's absence, in a town small enough, says nearly as much as his presence would have, and what it said, this time, was that Roy Hutchins was somewhere counting his own losses and not yet ready to discuss another man's. The county extension office called Levi's place a week later, having heard the same story from 3 different directions and grown curious enough to act on it. The agent's name was Porter Vance, a man with 30 years in orchard science, and a truck full of instruments he was eager to use on ground nobody had studied in decades. He walked the low rows with Levi for the better part of a morning, checking soil moisture with a probe and asking short technical questions in a rhythm Levi found easy enough to answer. Water temperature at the gate, Porter said. 51 degrees, this time of year, Levi said. Comes up from the spring at that. Depth of flow through the channels. ½ inch, sometimes less. You're not trying to warm the air, Porter said, half to himself, working it through. You're keeping the ground from freezing hard enough to pull the heat out of it too fast. Water gives up its warmth slow when it's freezing. Buys you 3-4 degrees right where the buds are, which is exactly where you need them bought. That's about the size of it, Levi said. Porter Vance stood at the edge of Block 2 a while, looking down the ditch line at the shape of it, the fall of the ground, the old scars in the earth where a ditch had run before and been let go. Somebody engineered this a long time ago, he said. This isn't luck. My father tried it once, Levi said. Wrote it down. Never did it again. Why not? Levi was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said. He didn't write that part down. Porter Vance nodded slowly, the way a man nods at a piece of machinery he respects and does not fully understand, and told Levi he intended to write the method up for the county bulletin, with his name on it, if he'd allow it, which Levi allowed with a plain nod, and nothing further. Roy Hutchins came to the fence on a Thursday in late May, alone, without his truck, walking the half-mile down from the ridge on foot, in a way Levi had never once seen him do. He stood at the gate a long while before he spoke, turning his hat in his hands, looking at the low rows heavy now with small green apples, where his own trees, a third of them, carried nothing at all. "I want to see the ditches," Roy said. "If you'll show me." Levi showed him. They walked the channel line together, Roy asking short questions and getting short answers, the two of them mostly quiet between exchanges, until they came back to the gate and stood there the way men stand when the tour is done and the real conversation has not yet started. "I told everybody in this valley you'd lose this ground by May," Roy said. "I heard you did," Levi said. "I was wrong." Levi did not answer right away. He looked out over the low rows, green now and thick with fruit that would be there in September, because of water and a dead man's sentence and nothing else. "You were working from what you could see," he said. "Nobody in this valley had watched it done in 40 years. I don't fault a man for trusting his own eyes." Roy was quiet a moment longer. "I've got 2 wells on the ridge doing nothing half the year," he said, "and a water truck sitting idle most springs. If you'd walk my low block with me, I'd take it as a favor." "I can do that," Levi said. They shook hands at the gate, the same gate Levi had leaned against in October when Roy told him he'd know different by May, and neither man mentioned that this time, because there was no need to. By July, the county bulletin had gone out under Porter Vance's name, with Reuben Esch's method described in careful technical language, and Levi Esch's low rows photographed in 3 places for the illustration. 2 neighboring growers dug their own channels off their own low ground before the leaves turned, working from Levi's ditch lines the way a man copies a hand he trusts. A grocer from town, a woman named June Talbot, who ran the produce counter at the market on Main Street, drove out in August and stood in the rows tasting apples off 3 different trees before she said anything at all. "These hold their crisp longer than anything I've bought this valley in 10 years, she said. "I'll take what you can spare, standing order, every fall from here on, if the terms suit you." Levi named a price. She matched it without much discussion, and they shook on it standing in the grass between 2 rows of trees that had not turned a profit in over a decade before that spring. A buyer from a cider house 2 counties over came through in September, with an offer for the whole crop at a price well above what June Talbot had settled for, wanting exclusive rights to everything the orchard produced going forward, more trees planted if Levi was willing. A contract that would have doubled the size of the operation inside 3 years. Levi thought about it 2 days before he answered. "I'll keep the arrangement I've got," he told the buyer. "This ground carries what it carries. I don't aim to ask more of it than it's built to give." The buyer left without the deal, and Levi did not mention the offer again to anyone, though Daniel asked him about it once, walking the rows together in October, with the harvest mostly in. "Why not take the bigger offer?" Daniel said. "Because I know what this ground can hold," Levi said, "and I don't know what it can't, and I'd rather not find out by asking it to carry too much." That harvest came in at 340 bushels, the best count the Miller orchard had produced in longer than anyone still living could say for certain, up from nothing at all the year before Levi bought it, up from 11 bushels the first uncertain autumn under his own hand. Roy Hutchins, working his own new low-ground channels that fall with water hauled from his idle wells, brought in enough of a crop himself that he stopped mentioning the frost of that May altogether, which in a small township passes for a kind of gratitude. The following April, on a night that turned cold enough to worry every grower along the county road, Levi walked his rows at midnight, with Daniel beside him carrying the lantern, and the 2 of them stood a while at the edge of Block 2, watching water spread thin and black across the ground exactly as it had the year before, and exactly as it had 40 years before that, under a different Esch, in a different April, with the same stars overhead giving back the same thin light. Levi went home before dawn and took his father's green journal down from the springhouse shelf, and beneath the old entry, in his own hand, he wrote a line to sit next to it. "Flooded the low rows again this April. held at 32 through the worst of it. The ground remembered what you asked of it, even after 40 years of nobody asking. He set his own black notebook on the shelf beside his father's green one, closed the springhouse door, and went out to check the hogs before dark. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who's been told that some things can't be saved once the cold has already decided against them. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever stayed up past midnight, watching over something everyone else had already given up on, I want to hear about it. Every comment gets read,